Well, hi, my name is Baai Logan, and welcome to the Hong Kong Legends DVD release of Prodigal Son, one of my all-time favorite kung fu classics. I always love to watch this movie, and it's even more fun to be able to sit and watch it with you and point out specific notes of interest. The Chinese title of the film is Bai Ga Jai. Bai meaning to destroy, Ga meaning family, and Jai meaning boy. So the literal meaning is the boy who will destroy his family. Really, what it means is like the spoilt son of a rich man. The equivalent is like a youngster who inherits a huge fortune and then wastes it away with fast living or basically a misspent youth. It's been translated into English as Prodigal Son, obviously relating to the biblical story about the rich man's son who's banished from home, makes good, and finally returns and is warmly accepted by his father. That's actually not a bad translation, because I think if you literally called the film The Boy Who'll Destroy the Family, it's going to have a different meaning altogether. So Prodigal Son is about as close as you're going to get. It was also released in the American market as Pull No Punches, which is definitely a kung fu movie title if ever I heard one. Yuen Biao in Pull No Punches. And there he is, Yuen Biao, opera school buddy of Jackie Chan and Sammo Hung, who is very much a protege of Sammo, who launched him in Magnificent Butcher, Knockabout, and he was also in one of Yuen Mo Ping's better films, Dreadnought. And funnily enough, on set and in private, his English name is Bill. Everybody knows him as Bill Yuen because his Chinese name is Yuen Biao, and so he's known as Bill Yuen. But because there was an attempt by Golden Harvest to market him as almost a thinner, younger version of Jackie Chan, he was given the English name Jimmy. But they never told him, so he was always surprised when Western fans would call him Jimmy because he doesn't know that name, doesn't relate to that name whatsoever. Here we have a sequence here with this challenger who's been set up to challenge the character played by Yuen Biao. The challenger, the guy in the middle here, is actually, his nickname is Gale. His real name is Fung Li, and he's a comic stuntman. You can see he has quite a decent acting role in Hocus Pocus, but normally he's in very small supporting roles in Sammo Hung films. He's the guy with the stutter in Eastern Condors, and he's known almost universally by his nickname, Gale, which means curry. I have no idea why that would be or how he got the name, but his real English name is Fung Li. And it's the setup for the film is that the character played by Yuen Biao, who is Leung Jan, is a legendary figure in the history of Wing Chun Kung Fu. He is to Wing Chun Kung Fu what Wong Fei Hung is to Hung Gar, or what Wong Fei Hung is to Southern Shaolin martial arts, this great indomitable martial arts master. So this is kind of the drunken master of Leung Jan. Drunken master showed the naughty young Wong Fei Hung, and it shows you how Wong Fei Hung came to be the great master that we know from all the films like Once Upon a Time in China and the old black and white Quan Tat Hing Wong Fei Hung films. So this movie, we get to see how Leung Jan became the legendary figure that he would become in Southern Chinese martial arts circles. So in this scenario, these guys have been sent basically to fight with Leung Jan, who would like to be the best martial arts master in Fatzan, the southern Chinese town where the film is set. But actually his wealthy father is so worried about him that he's paying these guys to lose and to get beaten up. And his instrument for doing that is the odd-looking fellow who you see following Yuen Biao around with the very red nose and odd teeth, and he's almost totally unrecognizable. He's actually a guy called Peter Chan Lung. Not this fellow. There's a proliferation of red noses in this film. This guy on the left here is Peter Chan Lung, who'd been a member of the Bruce Lee stunt team. You wouldn't tell him from the way he looks in this movie, but he's actually the guy with the flock of seagulls haircut in Fist of Fury. You know, when Bruce goes into the dojo and there's two guys challenge him, and there's the one guy that says, "It'll just take me to show you." It's the other guy with like the real funky rockabilly haircut, and that's Peter Chan. And he's another member of the Sammo Hung team. You see him, probably his most memorable part outside of this movie was in Spooky Encounters, where he plays a wicked Taoist magic master. And he also reprised this role years later in the first Fong Sai-yuk movie, where he plays almost the same role with the same hairstyle or lack of hairstyle and makeup for that film, which was actually starring Jet Li. And here's the first scene of Wu Ma, and he gets to say the title of the movie. He gets that honor. Red Nose Number 2. Wu Ma was a protege of the great Zhang Jit, one of the great directors of Shaw Brothers, Chang Che or Chang Jit, and moved over to Golden Harvest, where he directed Manchu Boxer and also directed Dead and the Deadly, which was produced by Sammo Hung. He's not a martial artist per se, but he's great at doing this kind of these comic turns in martial arts movies. He directed me for his sins in the film Circus Kids, and I actually saw him not so long ago. He was at the Hong Kong Film Awards. He's living in China, and I believe doing other business as well as still maintaining some interest in filmmaking. And seemed in good health, and we had a catch-up conversation because I think I haven't spoken to him, probably with good reason, since we did Circus Kids in 1995. So, but it was good to see him, and he's seems fit and well, and he was there to honor his Sifu, who's obviously getting on in years now and in not great health. But Zhang Jit was actually the recipient in absentia of an award at the Hong Kong Film Awards this year. So that was the background of Wu Ma, and he obviously in this sequence is playing a supposed challenger who also is going to come and challenge Leung Jan. Leung Jan, of course, is a character like Wong Fei-hung, has been played by several people, most memorably Leung Ga-yan in the film Warriors 2. And in Warriors 2, which was actually shot before this movie, Sammo Hung made that film before he made Prodigal Son, we actually see the fully realized Leung Jan. And in that movie, we actually see the events surrounding his death. So that defined Leung Jan as a Wong Fei-hung style hero. And this movie goes back to the formative years of the character. And but I think he was very firmly established in people's minds as by the Leung Ga-yan performance in that movie, because it was a very similar performance given by Melvin Wong in the movie Disciple of Shaolin. And that film was actually meant to star a guy called William Jung Juk-hing, who is a real-life Wing Chun martial arts master who's based in Melbourne, Australia. And I think he's a great, obviously a very well-known and respected kung fu master, but he wasn't really an actor. So after a week or so of filming, he was let go and they replaced him with Melvin Wong. And it felt like Melvin Wong's performance, both in his physical appearance and the way he was acting, was very much patterned on the performance that Leung Ga-yan gave in Warriors 2. But here, Yuen Biao is kind of doing the youthful and energetic version of this character. The two teachers you see in the background there, the burlier of the two is Lei Hoi-san, as you see him just there, from Magnificent Butcher. He has the big final fight with Sammo Hung. And the other thinner member of the pair of teachers is Chin Yut-san, who's known universally as Sleeping Wizard, a nickname he picked up from his performance in the John Woo film Last Hurrah for Chivalry. Here we are in the Chinese opera show. Of course, Sammo Hung, the director, producer, and all-round creative force behind this movie, is very familiar with the traditions and culture of Chinese opera, having been trained in the Chinese Opera School in Hong Kong. He was big brother to Jackie Chan, Yuen Biao, Yuen Kwei, a.k.a. Corey Yuen, who's now the main action director working with Jet Li in America, and a whole generation of terrific martial arts and movie performers. And so he draws on this for this film, and you really get a sense of the time and place of these traveling opera shows. Later we see the red boats, the famous red boats on which the Chinese opera players would travel through the waterways connecting the different towns of southern China. The interesting thing, even to this day, you do get to see opera shows in Hong Kong, and they normally have big temporary bamboo structures erected on like basketball courts or marketplaces, and they always use aluminium, depending whether you're from the States or not, foil as like the wraparounds. It looks like a giant TV dinner, but within it you get to watch the amazing physical feats and the extraordinary musicality of the opera, which is a truly unique Chinese art form, but one that through film is actually getting a wider audience than really would ever have been anticipated. So here we see the introductory scene of one of the definitely for me the most memorable character in the movie, who is Leung Yitai, who's played by Lam Ching Ying. Lam Ching Ying was a genuinely student of the Chinese opera, studied under Madame Fan Fok Fa, who was the other main teacher of opera at that time. This is the troupe manager here on the right. His name is Zheng Gingbo. You may remember him from Spooky Encounters. He's the guy selling Daofu, who tells the story of the unfaithful wife. Great character actor. Worked a lot with Wong Feng, who was one of the mentors of Sammo Hung. You can see him in the films The Association and The Himalayan. And he does like a nice little supporting turn here. Zheng Gingbo, that's his name. And here's Lam Ching Ying, again, leading these guys into his trap. I mean, he's in his real opera career was famous for playing female roles. I have to say he's a particularly, to me, an unconvincing woman, and it's kind of a big ask that this guy in the gold is actually dumb enough to believe that this is genuinely a woman who he's chatting up after an opera show. But there were two at the time that these guys were coming up through the opera environment. There were actually two masters, Master Yu Jim Yun, who was teaching at the Chinese Opera Research Institute that Sammo Hung and Jackie Chan and those people attended. And there was Madame Fan Fok Fa, who was depicted by Cheng Poi Poi in the movie Painted Faces. And she was the instructor of a lot of the other players who went on to do opera. Of course, when they actually came out from the schools as fully qualified opera performers, they then realized that the opera was somewhat a dying art form in Hong Kong, certainly was not enjoying anything like the popularity it had had previously. And so there was a sense that they had to find some other use for their physical skills, and opera's loss was our gain because they went into kung fu movies. And I think it's fair to say that the first two generations of performers in Hong Kong films, Hong Kong action films, were opera performers. And it's probably to the loss of action cinema that we don't have anything similar today as a breeding ground for physical martial arts action performers. And this is a terrific sequence, a classic Sammo Hung fight to establish the physical abilities of Leung Yitai, and using every inch of the Chinese opera dressing room. This place would have been as familiar or more familiar to Sammo than his own home. So it makes sense for him to use this as a location, and we get our first chance to see the incredible adaptation that Sammo Hung has done in terms of making Wing Chun technique work on film. Because a lot of people would say, well, Wing Chun is a close-range fighting style and therefore couldn't work. The handsome fellow coming out just a moment ago wearing the white tunic, whose character name is Guai, is actually played by Wei Pei. And we'll see some more of him later. He has like a very limited role in the movie. At the time, he was under contract to Golden Harvest, who were trying to launch him as yet another of the Jackie Chan-style comic martial arts heroes. But going back to the Wing Chun, I mean, people had said, oh, it's a close-range fighting style. It would never work on film. What Sammo did, which I think is the reason that the style works on camera, is take Wing Chun upriver, because Wing Chun basically is a Shaolin martial arts style, and it was devised by somebody, whether it was a woman or a person of slighter build. We're not absolutely sure. There's not really any firm historical proof regarding the genealogy of Wing Chun, but somebody looking at the traditional southern Chinese martial arts styles and thinking there had to be a way to use technique to overcome brute strength. A lot of the times people take Wing Chun as being an art unto itself. What Sammo has done is actually take it upriver and kind of reintroduce the Shaolin element, so we get like a Wing Chun in transition. There's Wei Pei again. Wei Pei was this guy on the right here in the white tunic. He's was launched at Golden Harvest as a lead in two films actually. The Cheeky Chap, which is kind of as funky a title as you're going to get from a Hong Kong film, and a weird horror martial arts flick called Phantom Killer. And he's also probably best known for his role as Jackie Chan's Kung Fu school brother in Young Master. He plays Tiger, and Jackie plays Dragon in that film. He's now retired from the industry for some reason, even though he's good-looking guy, but rather like Chin Siu Ho, another guy, good-looking, good at martial arts. He had another good role in Magnificent Butcher. You see him fighting alongside Yun Bu in that movie as one of the fellow students of Wong Fei Hong. And for some reason, his style and his look didn't really gel with the Hong Kong audiences, so he could not become a star in his own right. Now they've gone to get Leung Jan, who they believe, of course, is really a famous and wonderful street fighter, but who actually has only mastered the flashy exterior movements of Chinese martial arts and has never learned the real art. And he's going to get like his comeuppance in this sequence. The scene coming up is really pushing the boundaries of what you can do with this kind of film, because we actually break into a musical number and they're actually performing opera. It kind of breaks the third wall as we go into a little opera scene within the movie that's set in an opera theatre. And this sequence actually was cut from Pull No Punches, which was the American edit of Prodigal Son, because it was felt that the American audiences totally could not relate to this little musical number that's coming up, being in the middle of what appears to be a relatively regular mainstream Chinese martial arts movie. And you see in the background of the shots, a few people keep coming back again and again. Gale is one of them. Even though he plays the first challenger to get knocked about in the film, he's visible in the background. There he is between the two guys on the left. You see him with his shirt off in the background there. And he keeps coming back throughout the movie on both sides of the good and the bad. And this is a thing that happens perennially in Sammo's movies, and it's because there was really, at that time, it was a broader talent base than we have now, but it was still relatively limited. So if you had a team on the set, you had to keep bringing them back to play supporting roles, to be doubling, and I think everybody's doubling everybody else in the course of this film. Lam Ching Ying, as well as being one of the leads, was also a stuntman, actually doubling for some scenes later in the movie. I'll point them out when they occur. And so, little chance here to see the close range against probably the most inept opponent that Leung Yitai gets to fight in the course of the film. Wonderful use of color, by the way. I mean, the red backdrop. I always wonder, they always have the traditional Chinese movies, not this one, but in other kung fu pictures, they actually demonstrate the arts before the film begins against the red. And I rather wonder if this is an inspiration from the opera, because the red is such a prevalent color, being a lucky color in Chinese. Hongsik is a very lucky color. And now they're into action. The guy with the spear in the background that you see in the middle of the shots, wearing like a brown outfit, is Yun Mo, who turns up throughout the film. Another one of the opera school classmates of Jackie Chan and Sammo Hung. There he is, holding a spear and watching the action in the middle of the frame at the back. And he's a terrific gymnast and martial arts performer. Probably his most memorable role is that the mad monkey fighter in Magnificent Butcher. But you see him working throughout the movie in various guises. Must have been interesting for these guys coming back into a film about Chinese opera, as they'd spent so many years training in their youth. And this whole sequence was cut because people were like, why would they be singing to each other on stage? Yun Bu, a rare chance actually to see and hear Yun Bu and Lam Ching Ying performing opera on film, because once they'd made the move into doing martial arts movies, it was that was it for their opera career, and it was there was no crossover. Once you'd done film, you wouldn't go back into opera unless it was maybe for a speciality, variety, charity TV show. And a terrific chance to show off the principal techniques of Wing Chun, the close range combat, trapping and grappling, and the really precise use of distance between two people. And the art has never had a better on-screen performer than Lam Ching Ying, who himself was not by any means a master of the Wing Chun style, but he's somebody with extraordinary physical skills. And you have Sammo, who's somebody who knows an enormous amount about Chinese Kung Fu. Here's a classical, I'm sorry to say, here's a classical Chinese opening, kind of Hung Gar movement, the raised finger, and it's going to come off second best in this clash between what's weak Southern Chinese martial arts and the Wing Chun style. But Sammo Hung, somebody, I mean, knowing, as Bruce Lee said, knowing is not enough, we must apply. And Sammo Hung knows a huge amount about the different Chinese martial arts systems. But what makes him different from some of the other people working in the field is he knows how to apply those elements of that specific technique or that specific style, which will look good on film. And he can transmit that to a third party. And if you've got somebody as physically capable as Lam Ching Ying, it's really it makes that part of the job a lot easier. But you really need those elements to be a really gifted choreographer if you're working in this kind of period movie. You have to know the style. You have to be able to communicate the elements that are necessary for the style to work on film. And then you need a team of people around you who are physically capable of performing the movements that you come up with. And you've got to have all three of those. And during this golden era of Hong Kong martial arts films, and for my taste, specifically at the Golden Harvest studio at this time, you had the greatest lineup of talent in front of and behind the camera that has ever existed for this particular kind of film. And the whole run of movies that Sammo Hung and Yuen Mo-ping and other people were doing, Jackie Chan, of course, were doing at the films at Golden Harvest at this time, was about as good as it's ever going to get for this particular genre. Nice impression, nice painting in the background there, the painted set. And now he's realized the truth and going home to confront his erstwhile teachers, of course, have been hired by his father to pretend to be teaching him genuine martial arts fighting techniques. So a few more words about them. The bigger guy on the left, who we're seeing in a few moments, is Lei Hoi San, who was the real villain du jour in all of the films of the Golden Harvest action films of this era. I mean, his build made him an ideal villain for the final reel, or indeed in the middle of the movie, to show the power or lack of it of a martial arts fighter. The other guy, Chin Yut San, Sleeping Wizard, he actually directed a film called Hocus Pocus, which was shot shortly after this one. I found out in researching that he actually has an English name, Chin Yut San. His English name is Tom Chin, but I've never seen that used apart from on credit, so I think it's like Jimmy Yun Bu. It's actually a name that was invented by the Golden Harvest marketing department. So now Leung Jan realizes that he doesn't actually have any martial arts skills whatsoever. Another film in which you get to see Lei Hoi San and Jin Yut San kind of side by side is the wonderful John Woo film Last Hurrah for Chivalry, which I think is the best of John Woo's Chinese martial arts epics. Of course, John Woo is better known for doing better known for doing gunplay movies and kind of communicating the principles of swordplay into his modern day bullet ballets. But he did do a number of martial arts pictures for Golden Harvest, and Last Hurrah for Chivalry is a wonderful movie, and sure due for a DVD release in the months or years to come as we slowly work our way through the incredible Golden Harvest back catalogue. The setting is here at Golden Harvest Studios. Most of the film was actually shot on location in the New Territories, or else in the studios at the backlot. I actually got to visit this set years and years ago. I'll talk some more about that later, but it was when I first became interested in Hong Kong film, I got the chance to travel to Hong Kong, and Sammo was shooting Bai Gajai at the studios at that time. Yuen Woo-ping was shooting Miracle Fighters, and Jackie was back and forward. He was shooting in Taiwan, and also at the studios, he was shooting Dragon Lord. So it was quite a fruitful time, and I guess it's no wonder that I became corrupted for life, and that was all I ever wanted to be involved with, and all I ever wanted to do was to work in Hong Kong film after that exposure to what was and is the best of the best. But Golden Harvest never really had much of a studio backlot compared to like Shaw Brothers, and they really got value for money. After you've seen a few dozen of their films, you get to recognize the sets, so it becomes an exercise in thinking whereabouts on each specific inch of the soundstage they were shooting each specific shot. But they have very, very fast, efficient set dressers and people doing the production design, and they could really outfit a set to look one way in an hour, and then an hour later it would look completely different. And I know all the people from Hollywood who've ever come to work in Hong Kong. For example, the team working on Golden Harvest, on Enter the Dragon, were amazed at the speed and the efficiency with which the local crews worked, given the fact that they had nowhere near the money or the resources, technically or physically, that their Hollywood counterparts have. And I think it's one of the strengths of the industry, it remains so to this day, that you get so much more bang for your buck. In doing this movie, Sammo really wanted to communicate, as well as a great story, and as well as the physicality of the Wing Chun style, he's actually bringing forward, the philosophical side of Chinese martial arts. I had the honor, privilege of working with Sammo on the film Highbinders, and we had a gathering in Dublin when some of his fans from Europe came over, and the conversation came to this film and to Wing Chun in general, and somebody was asking Sammo, did he still train, did he still practice the principles of Wing Chun, and he took me as his dummy, and he did some close range movements, and I think my arm is still numb. He still has it, definitely, and the kung fu skills don't seem to have atrophied whatsoever with the years. He's still as powerful in terms of his physical technique. This is actually out in the New Territories, and you'll recognize this from dozens of movies. This out near Chunwan, this particular landing place, we get to see the Ma Tao, the docks. This is the wonderful depth of frame. If you see here, Leng Yitai coming in, the girl looks back, steps out of frame, and then we're moving in. It's just the most Hong Kong movies of this era, if you get to see the texture of the movie, everything's kind of happening in two dimensions. It's two guys fighting or talking, and they're standing in front of a plain background, and that's what you're going to get. And the focus of the film is actually the Cantonese dialogue, or the Cantonese comedy or drama, or else it's the fighting on that two dimensions. But you see here constantly throughout the film, Sammo working with his cinematographer Ricky Lau, who was later to direct many films, including Mr. Vampire. He's pushed the depth of focus so that you actually get, this is like the Citizen Kane of Hong Kong martial arts movies, and you get a lot of depth to the shots, and I'll try to point some of them out later as we move along. Apart from Sammo, of course, came up with the story and the characters, there were two very good scriptwriters on the film, and you can actually very easily see where one begins and one ends, because Barry Wong, the late great Barry Wong, who I actually met on the set, was very kind to me. He spoke fluent English and made me feel very welcome when I visited the set of the film. He did most of the dramatic work and the more story-driven, the narrative-driven elements of the script. And the legendary Wong Jing, now a great director and producer in his own right, did all the Cantonese comedy and the plays on words and all the very localized humor that he's famous for. So it was a very good balance, and an example, I think, of the studio system at its best, in that you had all these different talents on call, and they were combining their abilities, not in any sense of conflict, but working together to make the film as a whole better. So this is actually a little bit of trickery, because they actually arrive they left from the same dock which they're landing on here. Earlier we saw the boat the red junk setting sail, and now here it is coming back, but it's actually the exact same location, but they're very clever. Last time they were shooting it from one angle, and now we see it from another. But if you watch a number of Hong Kong movies and TV series, that particular stone jetty going out into the water is very familiar, because there's very few places like that. Now this is another wonderful shot. Look at that, starting with the lanterns, and you can go straight back there, and you get a real sense that this is a theatre in which they're preparing for an opera show, and it's not on the backlot of a studio, that it's actually a live theatre. And of course this is drawn from the experiences of Samo. But again, the use of colour. I mean, earlier in the film the backdrop was entirely red, and then just a moment ago you had actually the blue backdrop. And there's little touches here, like this guy coming in, he's obviously got the runs. But these little nuances of detail what make this film special and what separate it from the many Chinese martial arts films made during the 80s. Yun Mo, who I pointed out earlier as a bystander, is the guy in the Guangong outfit. I've talked about Guangong on other DVDs, but I'll just mention him briefly. He's a legendary character. Oddly enough, he's the god of gamblers and policemen. And so I guess if you're a policeman in Hong Kong, at least according to the John Woo movies, you're kind of gambling with your life. So there's a certain logic there. And the reason he has a red face is that he was a mighty warrior and once bent down to wipe his face with in a stream, and his skin was stained by the blood of his enemies. So he was red-faced. And a classic character from the Chinese opera, played by the late, great Quan Tat Hing, who played Wong Fei Hung for many years. But he was famous for playing Guangong, or General Guan, on stage, and actually that performance was immortalized on film. And here is Yun Mo, who had actually, I don't know if he ever played the role in reality, but certainly had studied it as part of the Chinese opera background, is in the costume for that particular little gag. Great reaction there from Yun Bu. Unusual for a leading man to actually be able to do stunts, not just for himself, but for other people. Again, look at the depth of that shot coming in from here. This actually was one of the few times that they actually went out from the studio and shot on location. As we introduce the villain of the piece, is slightly different. The structure of this film is different because our villain's kind of an unwitting villain. It's Frankie Chan Fan Kei, who at the time, a Renaissance man, actor, director, composer. Among the other films he composed the score for was Young Master for Jackie Chan. I mean, composing in the Hong Kong sense of that era, which is that he was bringing in music from different sources as well as composing his own music. Also, he did the music for Drunken Master 2. And had done a string of martial arts movies, contemporary action martial arts pictures himself, in which he both starred and directed. That little mole you see on his eye just then was actually real. It wasn't a prop. It wasn't a bit of makeup. He had it removed in recent years, I guess for good luck, which is the reason people in Hong Kong normally have any facial plastic surgery, because it's considered very bad form to interfere with your physical appearance, because your luck might depend on it. So you'd actually go and consult a monk or a fortune teller, and he'd tell you whether you need to get your eyes opened or a mole removed. Jet Li had a mole removed from his nose and subsequently had his success in Hollywood. And I guess that's in his mind, that's the reason he could make it in Hollywood, is he had the mole taken off. So if you believe that, fine. And here we are in a little alleyway here. This will be familiar to you, Magnificent Butcher. Anybody who's seen that movie a bunch of times, we saw this alleyway and an encounter between Sammo Hung and somebody. And backstage again, and this is the blue set, because differentiating the fact that we've moved location. Earlier we had all red background, now we have all the blue background. And it's another example of the thought that's gone into the actual texture of the film. Would that every martial arts picture of the 80s received the same amount of detail, but it didn't. And this is why, in my mind, dollar for dollar, I would say, or moment for moment, I personally believe Prodigal Son is the finest Hong Kong martial arts picture of that era, maybe the finest one ever. If you add all the elements together, performance, the skill of the filmmaking in general, and the awesome choreography that we see scene by scene, building up to these two standout duels, which probably, in my mind anyway, are the finest ever captured on film in Hong Kong cinema. And believe me, there's been a fair few kung fu duels shot in Hong Kong over the last 40 years, so it's stiff competition. This film was produced in 1982, and the following year it won Best Choreography at Hong Kong Film Awards. It was nominated for Best Film, but it lost out to Anne Hoy's picture, Boat People. And I liken that to Raging Bull losing out to Ordinary People, because Anne Hoy's movie starring Chow Yun-fat was a fine piece of work, but I actually feel that the standard set by Prodigal Son in every area was superior, probably, and it was more of a unique work. Guy on the left there storming along with the bald head and the beard, the cuckolded husband, the cuckolded kung fu master, Lam Tai, familiar face to anybody who's seen all the old Law Wei films at Golden Harvest, like Invincible 8 and Boxer from Santong. Worked with the great King Hu on The Fate of Li Khan and The Valiant Ones, and you can see him with Jackie in all those lousy Law Wei movies that Jackie shot in Taiwan. He was a familiar face playing, by his physical nature, I think he's limited in the number of roles that he can play, normally cast as this kind of belligerent kung fu master. Here he has a good reason to be, because Guai, played by Wei Pei, has had this kind of fling with his wife, and so we have the guys coming in here to get revenge, leading into this set piece. But Lam Tai is the name of the actor. Now the Chinese boxers coming in, the opera fighting players, and the guy at the front, the first guy that we're about to see, is Ban Ma Jai, Zebra Pan, who is another member of the Jackie Chan stunt team, the Bruce Lee stunt team, who also has worked with Jackie on subsequent films, but was one of the Bruce Lee team and worked on all the Bruce Lee movies behind the scenes or in small supporting roles on camera. And his English name is Zebra, Chinese name Ban Ma, which means zebra. Guys on the left, Dick Wei is one of the bodyguards. The guy on the right, Zheng Fat. Another look at the manager there in the blue set. And he goes back through. And as you see, Ban Ma there on the left, he's obviously run back, having been beaten up by the real thugs who were following the Kung Fu master. And if you watch the film as many times as I have, then you actually get to spot the fact that people keep running around in and out of shot, in and out of different roles to suit the mood of the scene. To talk a little bit about the background of the character in the wings, Master Ngai, played by Frankie Chan, he also is a Baai Jai. So the character, the title of the film doesn't just relate to Yuen Biu's character, but also to his. He also is a wastrel. The difference being, in his case, his father has ordered his bodyguards to kill any kung fu master who might give his son a fair fight. Ngai, played by Frankie Chan, is actually traveling the land looking for worthy opponents, but his father wants to make sure that he's never actually in any danger. So it's a different solution to the same problem. And so it sets up a mirror between Leung Jan, played by Yuen Biu, and Master Ngai, who's played by Frankie Chan. The political backdrop of the time is that the Han peoples of China were being ruled by a minority, the Manchus from the north. So it's during the Qing dynasty, the period when most Hong Kong martial arts pictures are set. And that means that Master Ngai, coming from a Manchu family, has power over the Hans, over the local peoples, and is somebody who cannot be messed with lightly because of his political power and the structure of China at that time. So here we get to see, he's obviously impressed now to see this dazzling display of martial artistry. Now, in this, Lam Tai actually could do basic martial arts techniques, but for the little sequence that's coming, he's doubled by Sammo. And Sammo is somebody never worried to jump in front of the camera if need be. And obviously his build, here's Sammo obviously very smart in the way that he's doubling it. Again, it's only because I've seen the film too many times that I actually recognize Sammo on the receiving end of the blows from Leung Tai. Leung Tai, a genuine character from Wing Chun history, a traveler on the red boats through China who had actually learnt the pole techniques from the Shaolin abbot Chisin Kale there on the right of the two guys coming in through the curtains. He's been in the film 3 times already. There he is, flipping away. But again, Leung Tai was actually a real character, and he was had learnt the pole technique from the Shaolin abbot Chisin, who after the destruction of Shaolin was hiding out on the red boats as a cook. And that's how the pole techniques, which is slightly to the off-center of the Wing Chun style, came to be part of the system. This is a terrific little scenario, this spaghetti western showdown, as one of the former challengers of Master Ngai comes for a rematch, played by James Chen Jun, who was a regular in the Bruce Lee movies. He's in Big Boss, he was one of Bruce Lee's cousins, and in Fist of Fury, one of his kung fu brothers, and in Game of Death, one of his fellow combatants fighting their way up the tower, and a regular working in the Lo Wei films with Jackie Chan, and also used many times by Sammo Hung. The last performance that I know of was in Blade of Fury, which was a swordplay action picture that Sammo shot in China. Again, it was produced by Lo Wei, directed by Lo Wei, but I believe Sammo did a lot of the directing on that. And Tian Jun, James Ten, was actually one of the action directors on that movie. And confusingly, there's also a member of the Hong Kong legislature who's called James Tien, but it's a different guy. So if you ever read the Chinese newspapers, you see James Tien. He did not become a politician. I think he's retired now and living in Taiwan and doing whatever retired actors do in Taiwan. But look at this terrific sequence. Good on Frankie, because Frankie Chan had done a little bit of taekwondo, but he's not really a kung fu guy. And he studied, I mean, obviously a good physical study, doubled by Yun Bu for a lot of the acrobatic kicks, because at that time Yun Bu was the best tricky kicker that they had at Golden Harvest, at least among the Chinese players. I mean, the Koreans had a different style, and Sammo, I think, was almost single-handedly responsible for bringing over all of the Korean guys, apart from Wong Lee, who Siyun brought over. But Yun Bu was the best of the tricky kickers they had at Golden Harvest, so he doubles the kicking. But a lot of the close-range hand stuff, it's actually Frankie Chan himself. So he's a talented guy. Why didn't he become a bigger star? For some reason, he chose a screen persona for himself that was very cool. I mean, cool to the extent that he distanced the audience. And he, even as he got on in years and got into his late 30s and early 40s, he persisted in trying to convey a youthful image. And I think that he grew, but his characters did not. But some of the movies that he did, I still think, if you look at the action scenes in them, are really terrific. Burning Ambition, Outlaw Brothers, they were all a lot of fun. And it's just his persona didn't really communicate with the broad Hong Kong audience. He was in a TV series that was actually produced by the company I'm working for, EMG, called Last Tango in Shanghai. And now spends most of his time in Beijing. And he's still working in the industry on TV series. And he's somebody, I think, who has the ability as a director, perhaps more than as a star, that he could actually come and work in the West. He's got some impressive credits. He kind of ghost directed scenes for Operation Condor and Thunderbolt and Drunken Master 2 because of his long friendship with Jackie Chan. But for whatever reason, he's yet to make the transition and isn't working in China at this time. Here we have another great performance here from Lam Ching Ying. I really greatly admire the range that he had as an actor. He became synonymous with Mr. Vampire, going Sisin-san. And so after that, he was doing all these different variants of the Mr. Vampire role. But if you look at him here or in Painted Faces, where he plays this kind of failed opera star who's become a stuntman and sustains this injury and has to do this scene where he's in a delirium. Or if you look at him in the Ringo Lam film, School on Fire, where he plays this kind of no-nonsense cop. He was actually capable of a very good range of roles. And it was a great loss when he passed away at such a young age from cancer. And actually, it's one of the very few times I've seen Sammo Hung cry in public. I mean, probably the other time was when I gave him the script for Highbinders. But it was at the funeral of Lam Ching Ying. And my dear friend and fellow Hong Kong film author, Stefan Hammond, reputedly has the image of Lam Ching Ying tattooed somewhere on his body. I don't know where. Maybe there can be a competition on a forthcoming DVD release from Hong Kong Legends. Guess where Stefan's Lam Ching Ying tattoo is. And that, my friends, is dedication. We did come across a guy in Dublin who had Jackie Chan tattooed on his back. But that's as far as I've seen it go. Bruce Lee, I guess. People have Bruce Lee tattooed. Chung Fat there, who another student like Lam Ching Ying, student of Fan Fok Fa. You remember him as the crazy cat killer from the movie Magnificent Butcher. The other guy is Dick Wei, Taiwanese army captain and taekwondo expert, who was discovered by Zhang Jit in Taiwan and became the kind of bad guy du jour for most of the 80s, and just turning in a very slick little supporting role here, but in other films like Project A, he's more to the fore and really gets to show his stuff. I love that music cue, the very kind of forceful strings that Frankie Chan has put into this sequence. And actually, if you look at the very nice set that was completely constructed on the soundstage with the water and everything, was constructed on the Golden Harvest sound stages. You can actually see it in the documentary Bruce Lee the Legend. There's obviously a rather stage-managed scene when Raymond Chow and producer Andre Morgan go to visit the set of a film in production. And the film is actually Prodigal Son, and you see them come down the main street set and walk onto this location. Again, a nice idea of the depth of the shot. If you look in the background there, the boats going by, the junks actually drifting by, and in a moment you actually get to see on the table, if you note, during the conversation that follows, there are people actually who are oblivious to the fact that there is this kind of verbal challenge developing, and you see the chopsticks coming in and out of frame as the food is set. I mean, this is a very grand environment for the Chinese opera players who normally were kind of down on their luck and just eking a living from town to town. This is a very grand environment for them. So the players are actually kind of, hey, give us our dinner, and they're not interested too much in this battle of wills that's building between Master Ngai, who's the host. You see that they're straight into the food, something that Sammo would relate to, because when he was coming up through the opera school, I think he and Jackie and Yunbu endured really pretty severe deprivation in terms of the finer things in life, which is perhaps why he enjoys life to the full now that he's made it as both an actor and as a director. So you got that little moment there that I always like, the little touches that make the portrait so wonderful of the chopsticks coming in from out of frame. And there's obviously no escaping the fact that this whole thing has been stage managed by Ngai to be the backdrop for a duel between him and Leng Yitai. And it's this scene that we're building up to. If I was asked to show somebody the finest scene of Hong Kong action cinema, of Hong Kong martial arts movies, I would actually show the fight we're about to see. In my view, and believe me, I've seen a few, I have to say that this sequence is the best choreographed and executed that there's ever been in the history of the genre, saying quite a bit. And again, look at the detail in the uniforms, the costumes here. They really are exquisite. There's a nice little touch when, if you look at the boatmen, as they go down to the end of the bigger junk, the restaurant junk, to have the showdown, we actually get to see in the background the smaller boats being pushed back, and the guy comes in, the boatman, and he sees they're about to fight, and this guy hasn't learned his lesson. He's still chasing girls. See the guy come in? I love this little moment. He's selling dim sum on the boat. He's like, oh, they're going to fight, and he's out of there. He's moving his boat. Nice music. I mean, again, full chops to Frankie Chan, composer and star. I mean, he did come up with the music for this sequence as well. So you get those wonderful atmospheric chords. And then I'll tell you where it comes, but it's my favorite music beat, I think. And they're off. Look at that. Incredible. Frankie's style actually is a kind of composite style, but it's kind of dragon style. It's more northern, which would be appropriate for somebody who was a Manchu, whose family would have come from the north of China. And countering it, this incredible display of the close-range trapping, checking, striking style of Wing Chun. That moment, I just love that. Bom, bom, bom. Terrific. And Sammo has a perfect sense of pacing of a scene, not just in the exchange of technique, but in the shots, the editing of the shots, and the reaction of the people around to the combat that's happening. So you get this wonderful synthesis of physicality, of performance, of film art, and it makes what was being done in the time in America or elsewhere in the world in terms of martial art movies, it's like a finger painting next to a Picasso when you see this. And the colors, and this is the one set, this is probably the most intricate set built for the whole movie. And the reason is that Sammo knows this is the fight sequence that's really going to make or break the movie. And I remember I came back from Hong Kong, and it was sometime after that I actually got to see the film in all its entirety in Leicester Square at a midnight show. And I'd been on the set bothering Sammo with questions about Bruce Lee, and my God, I looked at this and I said, this is not better than, but totally different from what Bruce Lee was about. And it's the wave of the future. And it was probably one moment when I thought, geez, this is something that you want to be involved with. And I always wish, that the fight could be allowed to run its natural course, and that Frankie would get his butt kicked by Leung Jan. But then we wouldn't have a rest of movie, or it would be a different movie to the one that we're about to see. So we actually have to have this break in the action when he's afflicted by asthma. So it sets up the tragedy to follow, and then the eventual showdown between the fully trained Leung Jan and Master Ngai, which is the final finale of the movie. And here we set up the fact that the father of Master Ngai has instructed these guys to ensure that he come to no harm. And nice background set. This actually was This also was on the back lot, one of the standing sets, which is used as like a reception area for a noble. And again, if you see a lot of these movies, you will see the same sets redressed and used again and again. Here we flash back. Here we are. This is actually an exterior. It's the Manchu Palace, and it was actually one of the times they went to shoot on location. We don't ever get a kind of three-quarter shot of the father of Master Ngai, but it's nice detail. We get to see him in that wide shot. See the bodyguards. When we come in close and we see Ngai's father, look at the scarring on the side of his face. I mean, what does that mean? It's just one of those little details that Sammo throws in there, and maybe it hasn't got any specific meaning, but it gives like texture, and you get this golden symbol here, which is like an imperial edict that cannot be questioned. So basically, it's the equivalent of the old story about the samurai being able to behead a peasant who looked at them wrong. It allows for these people to do whatever they want with impunity. Gentleman here playing the Doctor will be a familiar face for those of you who've seen the Bruce Lee film Fist of Fury. He's actually the guy who reads the eulogy for Fot Yun Gat at the beginning of Fist of Fury. And was getting on in years then. I mean, he's a middle-aged man. He's obviously a bit older now because Fist of Fury was 1971 and this is 1982, so this is 10 years on. Amazingly, he was still alive and still acting when he did Donnie Yen did Kung Fu Master, because I remember watching the TV Kung Fu Master series Hong Hei Kun with Donnie Yen, and he was actually in it as a supporting actor. And this was a big surprise to me because I thought he may have passed away, and by now I'm sure he has. But at that time he was, like many performers in Hong Kong film, extraordinarily prolific. And a nice little moment here. What Yuen Biu's done is ask his manservant to do like a Kato in the Green Hornet, not the Green Hornet, Kato in Pink Panther, and to attack him without mercy. Kato, I've told you to attack, Kato. Do not attack. And so he has this kind of great moment here when he's asked the guy, and I love the reaction of the old guy. He's like, "Doctor, please." And then the old guy's reaction to this. Here we see Sammo, an abrupt change in tone for the film, because up to this point it's really been all brightness. There hasn't been any death or killing or not a genuine threat. And here we see the Chinese version of the ninja, of the Yanjie, coming in. The exterior there you see of the Chinese opera place is pretty much the same now, except what you're seeing there in the rattan wouldn't be rattan in the modern times. It would actually be aluminium or aluminum, depending how you pronounce that specific word. But here in the period, it's actually rattan. This was constructed out in the New Territories, so they actually built pretty much a full-size Chinese opera theatre for this exterior sequence, and had the people bedding down in the theatre as they would have done in the time during which the film is set for this sequence that follows. And it's really in this film, Sammo gets to show basically every side of his ability, both as obviously he's known internationally now as a choreographer of martial arts action, also a director of comedy, also a director of drama. There's Ban Ma Jai in close-up there, Zebra Pan, but also somebody very good with suspense, because he builds up this whole horrible sequence here. And also the way these guys move. I mean, how many Japanese ninja movies are there where the ninjas actually move with that kind of grace and terrifying silence? And the fight that follows is amazing. It's what really is Shaolin Challenges Ninja. In fact, it's kind of these guys have kind of wandered in from the wrong movie, because I mean the ninja really is a Japanese tradition. So I think they kind of borrowed them. I mean, maybe in tradition of Chinese they were the vagabonds or whatever, masked assassins. But we're really seeing the Japanese style ninja here, even though we're in Qing Dynasty China and the guys are actually Manchu officers who've been dragooned in by the bodyguards to enforce the brutal will. I mean, to kill all the opera performers. Why don't they just kill Leung Yi-tai and be done with it? But anyway, that's what they decided to do. It's Ban Ma Jai getting yet another close-up. I guess he must have placed some winning bets for Sammo on that day. And there's a great moment here. It's kind of this fake. The audience is faked into thinking maybe they're safe because this guy's woken up from a nightmare. And the first time, I think, in the movie, or one of the first times, we actually see this gimmick that Sammo uses throughout the movie, which is having us read the thoughts of the people. I mean, it's an interesting device. I'm not quite sure why Sammo decided specifically to use it in this film, or to use it the number of times he did. Maybe it's something that Wong Jing came in, because it's a trick that Wong Jing has used in subsequent films, where there's an expression or a moment, and we get to hear what the person's thinking to kind of give another element or another piece of depth to the actual scenario. And here, very brutal, and that kind of psycho music playing, again chosen by Frankie, who, in terms of composing, certainly has a track record and can compose music, but is also very good at borrowing music, which at the time was the prevalent tradition in Hong Kong film. They would borrow music from American movies. I don't know, that's such a problem, but things you had to choose the right music. And certainly in this instance they did, because that psycho music certainly fit in with this kind of brutal killing. And now this nice shot here of the blade coming in to the supposedly sleeping Leung Yi-tai, and then he's into battle. And you get another chance here to see the way that Sammo has adapted Wing Chun for the screen, and really has played tribute to its roots as a Shaolin fighting style. Because now we really get to see kind of a refined version, I suppose, of Wing Chun, with very limited footwork and upper body movement. But for film, that wouldn't necessarily look as good as what we're seeing here. So what Sammo's done is posited the theory that in its earlier stages, which is where we're at here, that Wing Chun would still look a lot more like Shaolin, would look a lot more like the Wushu fighting. So you get this, what a wonderful shot this is. Boom. Look at those number of movements and the number of people who have to come in from frame at the exact right time for Lam Ching Ying to be able to execute. Just go back and play those bits over and over again and look at the amount of action in a specific shot. There's a story, actually, that Van Damme came to Hong Kong on one of his several visits, and this is back in the 80s, and he met with Frankie Chan and said, I want to do a Hong Kong-style martial arts picture. And Frankie gave him the Laserdisc. This is before the wonderful days of DVD. Gave him the Laserdisc of Prodigal Son, and Van Damme came back with it the next day. He said, you know what, this isn't quite what I had in mind, which I can totally see why, because it's difficult for most American martial artists to do 5 movements in a shot, let alone, 30. As Lam Ching Ying could do in his heyday. Normally in a martial arts picture, not to single out Jean-Claude, who's a good guy, and I knew many years ago before he was as famous as he became later. But he was somebody when they do the style of his films is it's the Mantis boxing style here, not Van Damme style. The Mantis boxing style demonstrated by Chung Fat, but the Van Damme style is basically the choreographic style is he does a single kick and then they shoot from different angles, and that's a choice, and that's the American style. And it was thought for many years that this style of fighting would never work. And I used to have these long arguments with American filmmakers who says American audiences will never sit still for Hong Kong style choreography. Yeah, right. And now it's wonderful because not only can they enjoy it in the form of the new crossbred things like Charlie's Angels and Matrix and these kind of films, but they can actually see the real deal because these movies, thankfully, getting a release. Even the Hong Kong Legends ones seem to be finding something of a market in America, which I'm glad about. The boundaries of geography breaking down in this way so that people can actually enjoy these films as they deserve to be enjoyed. Pristine quality and with loads of extras, including this one. Now, pretty tricky fire gag. Fire is always difficult to work with on film, and that's probably why now a lot of the times fire is actually a CG afterthought. But back in these days, back in 82, CG stood for what? CG was Kanji, and Guloyok CG. There was no... and look at this. This is really simple. This would be a moment in an American picture. Nice shot there, the relative position of the pole, and takes a breath, and boom! And it really... It shows how you can make something out of nothing. The impact of that is really quite something. So we have real people lying around where the fire is at, and this is always a tricky scenario. But again, by the time this film was made, Sammo and the rest of the stunt team had worked with probably every physical kind of stunt scenario known to man. So that the safety record of Hong Kong film was and is very good. And it's not that the films are not dangerous. It's just that the directors and the actors know their own capabilities and they know where the lines are drawn that they must not cross. So sometimes I think in the West, where I believe the accident record is not as good, it's because people do get overconfident and maybe believe too much in the power of technology, whereas in these days, they basically believed in what the human could do. This wonderful slow-motion sequence here. Look at the use of fire. And again, a very tricky sequence to work on because you've got a lot of people moving in frame at any given moment with the fire, which is one of the most unpredictable elements known to man. And there are all these guys, that was obviously intentionally on fire, but I'm sure during the rehearsal there were people unintentionally catching blaze as well. And coming up, nice shot there. I mean, I presume Ricky Lau was covered in asbestos for that if he was indeed operating his own camera, as many of the cinematographers did back in the 80s. Getting ready for the big escape, and one of the most painful arm breaks, actually. I remember there was a scene in Escape to Victory where they broke somebody's arm. Oh, make it a clean break, governor. And that's Yuen Biao through the flames. And the thing about Yuen Biao that's remarkable, I think him and Mark Dacascos both share something in common. Mark Dacascos' first film was American Samurai, and he not only did he play the bad guy, but he doubled for, among other people, I think he doubled for the leading man for some of the gymnastics moves. And I think that's an unusual claim to fame, as in this film we see Yuen Biao actually playing the lead and doing all his own fighting in his role, and also doing other people's fighting in their roles as well. So they definitely got their money's worth from Yuen Biao. Bill, or Jimmy, depending on what you want to call him. Pulling back, obviously, this shows why they had to build this incredible set out in the new territories, because there's no way you could have destroyed the Golden Harvest Studios quite like that. Nice Kurosawa-style shot there with the ninjas running against the burning sky of the background and still trying to fulfill their mission. I mean, these guys basically, I mean, they are bad guys, but they're just following orders, which I guess has been the excuse of many bad guys throughout history. But they come to a sorry end. But to an extent, you've got to think, well, they just, they would be killed anyway. If they followed orders, they get killed. And if they didn't follow orders, they get killed. So it's the lot of henchmen everywhere. Now we're coming up to something. Now this, I must say, gives me a little pang of nostalgia. This set. I slept on this set. I was in Hong Kong and ran out of money and wanted to meet Jackie Chan. And I stayed the night on the airport roof. This was in the days when airport security wasn't what it is today. And I came back and in the early hours to meet Jackie. He was coming in at 10. I got there at the studio at 5, and I crashed out. I slept with the pigs, and I'm sure many of you listening to this think that's where I belonged and where I should have stayed. But I was on that set, on the farmhouse set, which is all built as an interior on one of the main sound stages. Little bit of the Wong Fei Hung music there, under the general's orders, to introduce this wonderful character, Wong Hua Bo. A great name for Sammo Hung. Wong Hua Bo is a perfect character name for him. So he comes here, and we see him as he's a kung fu brother of Lang Yitai, and he's going to demonstrate calligraphy. And earlier I was saying I would pick out the fight between Lam Ching Ying and Frankie Chan as like arguably the greatest Chinese martial arts fight in a movie. This would be probably my favorite non-action physical comedy sequence from a Hong Kong movie. I love this sequence, and it works even if you're not familiar with calligraphy. Sammo also shot, or Yuen Mo Ping rather, and Sammo together shot a great little calligraphy sequence for Magnificent Butcher when Quan Ta Hing fights Lei Hoi San in a calligraphy duel. And this is obviously similar fruit from the same tree, fun with Chinese calligraphy. Sammo's character voice, I believe, is dubbed by Carl Macker. Carl Macker denies that, but I wonder if that's because at the time he was not a contract guy at Golden Harvest. He was working for other studios. But if you hear his voice, it really... I mean, at the time the film was made, there was no recording of sound on the set of a Hong Kong movie. So it was somebody else's voice in post-production, and normally just an anonymous dubber. But this voice really sounds like Matt Gar's voice in the Aces Go Places, the Joy Gai Pat Dong films. So and at the same time, he and Sammo had their own production company. So I think it might be his voice, and he's just being shy and retiring. The more acrobatic stunts here that you see from Sammo, I don't want to give the game away too much, is actually performed by Yuen Bu. There's actually a lady who's been writing emails to me who is a huge Yuen Bu fan and has been listing the number of Yuen Bu appearances where he's doubling for other people, and I know she's very shy and retiring, so I don't want to mention her name, but she was much appreciated that she sends in all these things. I mean, Yuen Bu's lucky to have such a loyal fan, but I had actually looked at a lot of the films a lot of times and didn't really think about who was doubling who, but a lot of the times for the gymnastic moves is actually Yuen Bu. Here's a wonderful moment, and again, for a martial arts picture, a Hong Kong kung fu movie, this beautiful artistic thing, and Frankie picked just the right music to accompany it. And then we get a final burst of physicality from Sammo. Of course, Sammo is amazingly physical, but there is a point that his body, being the build he is, cannot go beyond. So, but what's clever about him is he knows how to double himself in such a way that you just would not be able to tell, were you not tip the wink. Because nowadays, with freeze frame and zoom on DVDs, it's getting slightly easier than it used to be in the days of live theater. I mean, of films playing in the movies, not live theater, but like in the days when you had the movies playing in the theater. There's a great full stop to the whole scene now as he goes on his face. Boom. Great shot. Wonderful performance by Sammo, this broad comic role. And this is where you see the script writing of Wong Jing as opposed to Barry Wong. They're two different people. Wong Jing coming into his own because he's very good at playing this kind of playing with the Cantonese language, which by its nature lends itself to double entendre, double entendres, because you have like these 9 tones, which are all of which for one word, 9 ways of saying the word with different meanings, so that you can imagine the fun you can have with that. And the Chinese writing there is "Ngong oi ba ba," I love daddy, and it's got that great picture of Sammo on the left there, and he's giving it as a present to her. Part of the gag about his character is that he's a bit of a ruffian, but he's trying to act like a dukshuyan, like an educated person. Dukshu is somebody who's educated. So he's trying to speak Siman. Now, there's 2 different kinds of ways of speaking in the Cantonese language, Siman and Cholo. Cholo is like an ignorant street person would speak. And seaman is like an educated person. And whereas in England, I mean, English is kind of more a matter of accent than the actual language. There are different ways of saying it, like different ways of speaking. I suppose we have it in English too. There's like a highfalutin way of using all those $50 words. So it's similar. And so he's trying to be seaman in this. And that's part of the fun from his character. And of course, a lot of that is lost in translation because you really have to understand Cantonese. I myself certainly don't understand all of the nuance, but I have people around me that do. So, I can try to share some of that with you guys as we watch the movie. And this was really a wonderful, intricate set and very comfortable. I mean, let me tell you, there's a lot to be said for sleeping with the pigs because they know where it's warm and they know where the food is at. So here's the still injured Yunbu with chicken for breakfast. Talking about the characters in the movie, though the relationship between them, I think, is obviously an invention of Sammo and Barry Wong and Wong Jing. The characters of Wong Wabo and Leng Yitai, at least as far as we can establish, are genuine historical figures. I have to say this, a lot of the stuff that's actually kind of transmitted as fact about the history of Wing Chun really is an oral tradition. There's not much in the way of written literary history to draw on. So, I mean, it's really kind of become the mythology of Wing Chun Kung Fu. Wing Chun Kung Fu became very popular in the West. I mean, more popular and more well-known than the other Southern Chinese martial arts systems just because of Bruce Lee and the fact that Bruce Lee had trained technically under the great Grandmaster Yip Man, but practically under the late great Sifu Wan Chun Lung and Master Chun Cho Hing, William Zheng, in the Wing Chun style. And so this style became really popular in the West. And so people, obviously Westerners having the inquiring minds, have constantly been researching and looking into the history of Wing Chun and found that it's actually a lot more complicated than the very simple story that was conveyed for most of the history of the Wing Chun style while it was in Hong Kong. The most famous person in the contemporary era of Wing Chun is Yip Man, who brought the style from Fatzan into Hong Kong and became the instructor to many great Sifus, including and many great students, including Bruce Lee. And so we know his version of events, and people have gone up into China as China has opened up and researched the actual background and history of Wing Chun and found there's actually the more to its history. I mean, my dear friend David Peterson, who's a Wing Chun instructor based in Melbourne, Australia, is also a great scholar. He can read and write Chinese. He speaks Cantonese and Mandarin, and he's kind of made it. I think it's his life's mission to research this kind of information. So a lot of what I've found out over the years has been thanks to him. But we do know that we're fairly sure that these people really existed. That the guy on the right here, Wong Wabo, played by Sammo Hung, Chinese opera performer, who traveled, and the thing is that the traveling on the red boats, the fact that it might seem strange, why are these opera performers all kung fu masters? But at the time, there was a rebellion, or a kind of a low-key rebellion occurring, in which the supporters of the Ming Dynasty were trying to overthrow the Manchu warlords, the Qing, who had taken over the Han peoples of China. And they'd pretty much lost the war, and they were fighting a guerrilla war against their overseers. So they were traveling from place to place on these boats, kind of undercover. So they were like undercover warriors, and they were either they would be opera performers or they would be actually working on the boats in some capacity or other and using it to travel around and communicate. And it's like hiding in plain sight. They were very obvious, these red boats traveling from town to town, but perhaps would be overlooked by the authorities because it would be presumed that anybody traveling with them was an actor or somebody working with the opera. But actually these were martial arts masters, including the abbot of Shaolin having been destroyed, according to myth, or legend, let's say, had been destroyed by the Manchus. So we have the story of the different Shaolin elders spreading out into China, or specifically in this case into southern China. Now there's a funny little moment that comes up later relative to the fact that they're going to be given a chicken for their dinner. And I'll come back to that later. It's a very good Wong Jing verbal gag, which is kind of dependent on the fact that the audience, the primary audience for the film, obviously, was the Hong Kong Chinese audience. But going back to the history, I mean, talking about Wing Chun history, I mean, I think many people will be familiar with the fact that the style was originated supposedly by a woman. And the story is that there was a monk who was a nun, rather, like a female monk who was at Shaolin Temple called Moy, who was one of the seniors of the five elders of Shaolin. And she decided to after the conflagration, after the destruction of Shaolin, settled at a place called Baai, which is White Crane Temple. Shaolin Temple is Siulamji, and this was White Crane Temple, Baai, on Dalong Mountain, on the border of Sichuan and Yunnan province. And she was settled at this temple, and walking in the woods, I guess, doing her mobile meditation, she witnessed a fight between a snake and a crane. And based on the movements that she saw both animals or both creatures executing, she created this system, and this became the basis of what we now know as Wing Chun. Now, I did hear that the whole story of somebody watching a snake and a crane, this was actually something that came up with at the spur of the moment by Yip Man. Because Yip Man, rather than being the kind of very stern patriarch of Chinese martial arts movies, I think his character was maybe more like, in some ways, the old drunken master figure. I mean, he wasn't a drunkard, but he was somebody with a sense of humor who seems to be quite an interesting character. I think he's probably much more of an entertaining and amusing person than he's given credit for being, because now, of course, he's passed away. He's the great patriarch. He's the black and white picture that you see in all the Wing Chun Kung Fu schools. But I think probably there was more to him than met the eye. And the story is that he actually came up with the snake and crane tale because a writer kept bothering him, and he just made it up to get rid of the guy. Now, here's Samo's going to teach his daughter Kung Fu, and he says the reason why is because last night we lost a chicken, next we might lose a pig. And pig is like a Chinese word meaning virginity. So he's saying you've lost the chicken, so next you might lose your virginity. And then she says, no, I'm keeping my pig safe for you, Daddy, which is a line that only Wong Jing could come up with. But that's, I'm sure the subtitling of this movie will be at the usual high standard of the Hong Kong Legends releases. But if you read that about the losing a chicken and today we might lose a pig, that's the actual meaning. And I was actually on the set when they shot this sequence and had no idea what I was looking at. And I remember watching Samo. First time I set eyes on Sammo Hung. Well, I mean, I've seen him on film fighting Bruce at the beginning of Enter the Dragon. He was actually doing the Dan Chi Sao, the single-handed Chi Sao on that unique contraption, which incidentally is a very good device. I've never seen that in a Wing Chun school, so I have a feeling it's something that Samo, unless it's Samo again, he's kind of retro designing, like they're doing with Star Trek now. He was like, gee, I wonder if they used to have this kind of contraption back in the days of the wooden dummy chamber at Shaolin Temple. I've never seen it actually in a Wing Chun Kung Fu school. They have the standard Muk Jong, the wooden dummy, which is part of the system, but which we see later in the movie. But I've never actually seen that specific kind of apparatus used outside of Prodigal Son. So maybe it is neat and is an invention of the ever-agile mind of Sammo Hung. But going back to the story, I mean, that was something that Yip Man, the story was that Yip Man basically was one of his nicknames was Duck. So duck means in Chinese, it's like you can. And I mean, you say duck, it's kind of like whatever. Duck. And he always used to be that way. If people bothered him for information, they say, can we do it this way? Can we do it that way? Yip Man would be duck. And it was the same thing. The guy says, well, what's the history of Wing Chun? And Yip Man says, well, he was figuring out a more efficient way to fight. And the guy was like, well, wasn't there an animal involved or a god or something more interesting? Whereupon he said, well, there was a snake and a crane. So maybe it really happened, maybe it didn't. Whatever, we know, according to the legend, that Moy did invent this specific system. And if you analyze Wing Chun, you do see that it's very evident somebody had looked at the southern Shaolin fighting styles and worked out a more efficient way for a person of slender build, say a woman, to apply these martial art techniques. So there's a very obvious connection, and this is something that Sammo had looked at for this film. According to legend, Moy came to know of this woman called Yim Wing Chun. Wing Chun meaning beautiful springtime. So her surname was Yim, but her given name was Beautiful Springtime. So I guess we can imagine that she was like a local beauty. And some stories, she was being forced to marry a local bully, and in some, she was being forced into prostitution. But anyway, she was being forced to do something by a man, and the only way to get out of it was if she could beat him in a fight. Or in some stories, it was if her father could beat him in a fight, but the father was sick. So it was kind of like the old Fa Mulan legend of the woman going into battle for her in place of her sick relative. So Moy had devised a system based on the snake and the crane and taught this to Yim Wing Chun, who then handily defeated her challenger, the guy who was bullying her, and that meant that she was free to marry whomever she pleased. And Moy was so happy that she named the system after her disciple, so it became Wing Chun Kung Fu. Though I have actually seen advertised people teaching Moy Kung Fu along with all the other different variants of Wing Chun that are available. So Moy's name does live on, but Wing Chun is now the name by which the style is known, and the literal meaning is beautiful springtime. And that character of Yin Wing Chun has been played in several films and TV series, but most memorably by Michelle Yeoh, Young Sikang, in the film Wing Chun, directed by Yuen Wo-ping. Though I have to say that in that film, there's very little Wing Chun, and certainly does not depict the events I've just related. Those actually happened before the story that's shown in the film Wing Chun. The style is a style that's meant to enable somebody to be able to become an efficient fighter in a much shorter period of time than the traditional Shaolin styles. So you're meant to be able to be proficient at fighting in Wing Chun in the longest would be 3 years, which is funny because today when obviously specific masters want to keep their students for a great length of time, some masters actually dole out the information like the wooden dummy form. They just give out a move a month, and the 3-year system will take 15 years or 20 years to learn because the Sifu is concerned about keeping the students for a long time so they can make more money. I guess. I don't know the rationale behind it. But I think the concept of of learning it in 3 years has gone by the wayside because people really want to keep students for a longer period of time. And Wing Chun consists of 3 forms, all of which we see represented briefly in terms of the movement shown in this film. Siu Lim Tao, which is small idea form, which is the basic, small not in the sense of diminutive, but small as in basics. Cham Kyu, which is searching for the bridge, and it's like how to apply the techniques that are kind of first devised in Siu Lim Tao by the small idea. And then Biu Ji, which is spearing fingers, which are like kind of a collection of techniques that are to be used in like an emergency situation when your basic Wing Chun techniques don't work. Then they have a training drill, which is Chi Sao, sticking hands, and Chi Ge, which is sticking legs, which is developing sensitivity for close-range combat. So you're really at a range in which most other fighters would feel very uncomfortable, which is almost less than arm's reach, so that you can develop sensitivity by doing this kind of rolling arms, forearm to forearm. Then there's the wooden dummy, which is the form that we see it in Wing Chun is fairly a unique Wing Chun training aid. It's different to the dummies that you see for Shaolin, different from the dummies used in Joy Lei Fat. And it's got different arms and legs. We see it later demonstrated by Yun Bu. They also have the Bat Jam Do, which is the 6 cutting knives, which is the same weapon as the Wu Dip Do, the butterfly blades used by the Hung Gar practitioners, but the application of them is different. Then there's the Luk Dim Bun Guan, which is the 6.5 point pole, which I mentioned earlier. Leung Yitai, the character on the left of the screen here, played by Lam Ching Ying, is supposedly in history he actually learnt this as a separate skill from the Shaolin abbot on the boats and brought that into the system. But I love the acting in that moment that we just saw. I know I was rattling away about the history of Wing Chun because, history of Chinese martial arts, favorite topic of mine. If we ever have dinner together, get me started. We'll be there for breakfast the next day because I love Chinese martial arts. But anyway, back to the movie. That was a wonderful dramatic sequence there where you see a kind of an exchange. This is a nice little throwaway here when Samo's saying, well done. And Yun Bu says, yeah, well, just now you were teaching me every time I go to the toilet, I'll think of you. And there you see the kind of like the reading of the thoughts. A nice reaction here. The great odd couple relationship between this Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau couple. And watch him throw the cup. Samo really needs to duck. Obviously, he told Lam Ching Ying, throw it at me, and if I don't duck, you can just hit me on the head. Same with the teapot. Nice location there. There's a couple of shots where they need to show the sky overhead, where you see they've basically gone out into the new territories and you actually see an open sky. Otherwise, everything is interior. Beautiful cinematography by Ricky Lau. And again, you get that wonderful synthesis of Samo as a director, working with his action team, calling the shots, but working with a cinematographer who he can trust, who will get the shots he needs, the focus that he needs, and will also be able to take over that aspect of the production when Samo himself is in front of the camera, because it's quite a challenge to be directing yourself. Again, the interesting use of focus, of depth in these shots. for any period of filmmaking, but specifically for Hong Kong movies. I mean, if you look at the comparable films of this era, this really is head and shoulders in sophistication. And it's just one of those moments in film history when the right elements of cast, story, and everything else coalesced around one project. And there's no specific reason, I guess, why it was Baai, but it was. So now getting into the actual teaching of the art. And as I mentioned earlier, the system is designed to be taught over a short amount of time and with a much shorter syllabus than like the 18 weapons of Shaolin and all the many forms that there were in the traditional Shaolin style. I mentioned earlier that because Wing Chun had managed to defeat the bully, she could marry who she wanted, and she chose to marry a gentleman named Leung Bok Chow, who actually in the old Wing Chun movies played by Donnie Yen, and he was also a martial arts practitioner. Which begs the question, if he was good at martial arts and he was in love with Wing Chun, why didn't he fight the bully? But then it wouldn't have been as good a legend as it is now. So she taught the system to him. And in some versions of the story is Leung Bok Chow who says, well, you know what, I'm going to name this system after you, my beloved wife. And in others, it's actually Moy who's so happy with her student's victory that she gives the name. And also the thing is, with the Buddhist, with a nun, would be giving up the self, that she would not want to be perceived as being involved with the ego. So she would not want to name the style after herself. Didn't want to call it snake and crane boxing, so she had to find another name. So Wing Chun's name was the one that was chosen. So Leung Bok Chow inherited the style from his wife. At this point, we're presuming that he outlived Wing Chun because we catch up with him later. He's teaching a herbalist, a Chinese herbal doctor called Leung Yan Kwai, who in turn taught Wong Wabo, the character played by Sammo Hung, who in turn met and trained with and taught Leung Yitai. Though obviously in this movie they played a bit with the relationships that Leung Yitai and Wong Wabo are kung fu brothers, and there's not any apparent seniority between them. They're just this feuding couple. Wonderful display here. Look at that. This is actually the classical Wing Chun hand positions. The Tan, Bong, Fuk, Jam, but performed along with the footwork of Shaolin, so that it actually looks much more on screen. It works much better than if you actually would have filmed just a straightforward demonstration of somebody performing the classical Yip Man style Wing Chun that's widely taught today. The character played by Yuen Biao, as I mentioned earlier, he really is the Wong Fei Hung of Wing Chun. His nickname was actually Wing Chun Wong, which is King of Wing Chun. And he also, in later life, became a herbalist. Most kung fu masters, it was unheard of in that day for anybody outside the army to be teaching martial arts for a living. In Qing Dynasty China, if you were a kung fu master, you'd actually be, you'd either be from a wealthy family and wouldn't need to work, or you would have a livelihood as a herbalist, which is that you'd recommend Chinese herbs for various ailments, normally bone and muscle injuries, and you would repair broken limbs of various ailments. So they, in this case, Leung Jan was a herbalist. His clinic was called Jan San Tong, and it was on 5G Street in Fat San. Fat San, of course, is also where Wong Fei Hung hails from. So and in many of the films you see Wong Fei Hung introduce himself to people as Fat San Wong Fei Hung. So Fat San, obviously, as a kind of a crossroads for business in China, as it was and is, was also a really a hotbed of interest in China in terms of Chinese martial arts, and during the era in which this film is set. And to this day, they actually, for a long time, they had a museum for the Wing Chun tradition, and recently they have now one for Wong Fei Hung as well. So both sides of Fat San's martial heritage are now preserved, which is great. You know, if you're in Hong Kong or if you're in southern China, certainly if you're a martial arts enthusiast, it'd be worth visiting Fat San to see both of those places. But in his later life, at the age of 70, contrary to the events we see in The Great Warriors 2, Leung Jan retired and went back to his home county of Hokksan County, to the town of Gulou. And there he still took students and further refined the Wing Chun style. And it's obviously with any martial art, I think it's evolved over time. There seems to be a mood now that we don't want to evolve anymore, that Chinese traditional arts should stay as they are now. But there's evidence that from Shaolin, or the concept of Shaolin as the source of all Chinese martial arts, there's been a constant evolution of the arts from Shaolin down the south of China to places like Fat San, and from then on into Hong Kong. A nice little touch just then, the rabbit running across in the beginning of the shot, and always Sammo looking at ways in which he can bring something new and fresh to shooting martial arts training sequences and martial arts action scenes, because he was obviously very aware that at the time this movie was made, there'd been like a good 10, 15 years of martial arts filmmaking in Hong Kong. So there's a lot of ideas that had already been used. So constantly, it was the constant challenge was and is to find new ways to do stuff. Here he's having some fun because this is kind of a Wong Jan Lee stunt. And here we see a quick insert. This is all in the soundstage. Boom, flips up. That's a sky shot as an exterior, probably at Golden Harvest itself. Boom, but he misses. So this is like a great gag, and then he says afterwards, well, I was going to show it to you, but I was scared you'd steal my technique, you'd steal my secret kick. Anyway, Leung Jan in his had fathered two sons, Leung Bic and Leung Sun. But his true successor was a guy called Chan Hua Sun, also known as Money Changer Hua. And it was he who taught Yip Man. And Yip Man apparently learnt in Fat San from Chan Hua Sun. And then later, after Yip Man had relocated to Hong Kong, he accidentally happened to meet Leung Bic, who was one of the sons of Leung Jan, and also further refined the system, training under him. And so the saying is that he learnt from Chan Hua Sun, who was a fighter, and Leung Bic, who was a scholar. And it's we're seeing this here as well, because these two characters in the part, Wong Hua Bo's character, the Sammo Hung character, is depicted as being the experienced street fighter, whereas obviously Leung Yitai, played by Lam Ching Ying, is much more refined and much more of a scholar. So we have that same situation here, but obviously a couple of generations earlier. So it's a case of Sammo, as ever, finding the heart of the story, finding the elements that would work on screen, and then taking them from reality. I mean, film, of course, being a distillation of truth rather than reality. So Sammo finding the truth in the stories of Wing Chun and conveying it on the screen in this martial arts classic. Quick talk about Yip Man for a moment. Yip Man is the guy without whom I think we wouldn't really know about Wing Chun, or we'd probably know about as much about Wing Chun as we know about Choi Lei Fut and the other southern Chinese martial arts styles. Yip Man's father came from a family of merchants, and the family home was in Fuk Yen Avenue, Avenue of Happiness and Scholarship in Fat San. And Chan Hua Sun apparently lived at the Yip ancestral home and took students there. Here was the example of the dummy being used. It's a very unique design. I always think that it was a terrific piece of design by whoever came up with the concept for this dummy, on which is ideally suited to practice the specific techniques of Wing Chun. Now, Yip Man had a really illustrious and colourful lineup of students. Foremost among them in terms of international fame, of course, was the late, great Bruce Lee, living legend of Hong Kong action cinema. And then Wan Chun Lung, sadly passed away a few years ago, who was briefly the instructor of Stephen Chow Xingqi, who's a lifetime devotee of Chinese martial arts, and specifically, of course, a fan and follower of Bruce Lee. But he did his Wing Chun training in his younger days with Wan Chun Lung. William Zheng Chuk Hing, who had a brief attempt at film stardom with a disciple of Wing Chun, and then went back to teaching, which is probably what he's best at doing. He's based in Melbourne, Australia. Victor Khan, who's based now in London. The late Mo Yat, sad, isn't it? I mean, this generation passing away, but Mo Yat had many students. He's based in New York. I remember going to visit him years ago when I first got into martial arts journalism, going to New York and actually sitting in on a lecture that he gave about the second form of Wing Chun, about Chum Kyu. The sons of Yip Man belatedly became instructors, became involved with teaching Wing Chun. Yip Chun and his brother Yip Ching. And Leung Ting. Leung Ting, a very colourful character, editor, author, sometime actor, huge organisation. You hear different stories about Leung Ting. I want to go on record. From when I came to Hong Kong till now, I've worked with Leung Ting a number of times. I helped edit a book that he did about the history of Wing Chun, and I can say he's always been a gentleman and always treated me right. So that's my opinion and my comments about Leung Ting for what they're worth. But anyway, I was introduced to the art myself by a gentleman called Eddie Yeo, actor and agent, or theatrical agent, who's based in London, who also is quite a character. And if you think he was fun, there's Nino Bernardo, who was the person who I enjoyed training with the most, who was a guitar-playing Filipino Chinese from Macau who settled in London and formed this wonderful place called The Basement. Speaks 8 languages at least, probably more now, probably like 12 or 15. He's into roller skating, stick fighting, classical guitar, playing wizard. I mean, just an amazing character. Then later I moved to, when I was living in London, I got to train at The Basement with Nino. Then I moved to Birmingham to do combat and trained with a guy called Sean Rawcliffe, who was a student under Sam Kwok, another good friend of mine. And Sean, you may remember, had a little walk-on in Hong Kong 1941 with Chow Yun-fat. So if you go back, take a look, you'll see him there. And then somebody I was very impressed with, Randy Williams, an American Chinese Wing Chun exponent. So I've had a good run of meeting all the people who have been the descendants of Yip Man in terms of the Wing Chun system. And we've all of us talked about this film and how it was a great inspiration. If people were not doing Wing Chun before, they thought about it after watching this film. And if they were already doing Wing Chun, it kind of like really gave them further impetus to continue their studies and redouble their efforts. Because I think very rarely in the history of film has one style been given such a wonderful set piece in which to display its various attributes. And here, as you see with the lecture that Samo is giving to Yun Bu here, all the principles that are given out here are actually very accurate principles of not only of Wing Chun fighting, but of applied Kung Fu of any kind, or indeed of applied street fighting of any kind. So we get the balance between the more artistic elements of the art, as taught by earlier in the slightly earlier scenes, taught by Leung Yitai, and the styles that Wong Wabo is showing here. And I should mention also, I was mentioning the score earlier, there was actually two people working on the score, Frankie Chan and also Phil Chen. So credit where credit's due, because it's a very good score, actually taking some music specifically composed for the film, and also a few beats from other soundtracks, like, for example, The Psycho, and a few other just samples. I guess this is before the days of rap, but I mean, they were already sampling scenes. A very impressive behind-the-camera action team, incidentally. Sammo Hung himself, Yun Bu, Chan Wong-ai, RB, RB is the nickname of Chan Wong-ai. Chan Wong-ai is actually the brother of Peter Chan, the guy who plays the sidekick to Leung Jan, the guy who's kind of his butler in the earlier scenes of the movie and at the end of the picture. But they're actually brothers, and Chan Wong-ai is another stunt team, was a member of the Bruce Lee team and worked on this film. And Lam Ching Ying himself, who plays the master on camera and off camera, also was instructing people in how to perform both opera and different kung fu fighting techniques. And that's probably as good a team has ever been assembled behind the camera for any Chinese martial arts movie. And so when you've got that kind of lineup behind the camera, that magnificent seven or whatever it is, then no wonder the on-screen fights are going to be as exemplary as they are. Coming up is a really cute little number that I think you probably only see in a Hong Kong movie. Peter Chan talking to Peter Chan. Here we see him coming in his doofus outfit, and as a flashback to explain to the audience, he's gone to a fortune teller because he wants to communicate with the spirit of Leung Jan, who he believes to be dead. And so he has come up with a system of burning incense to the memory of Leung Jan and then dropping this black ink into the water, and then that will make the water into a mirror that will see the other world. And then Leung Jan, his late master, will appear before him. And being rather naive, he believes this to be true. But we see in a moment he remembers, he's doing Remembering 101, TVB acting. That's Peter Chan again on the right, so he's talking to himself. So that's Peter Chan also in exactly the same costume he wears in Spooky Encounters, where he plays the antagonist, this wicked Taoist master. So I don't know whether he's meant to be the same character or not. Certainly have my doubts about the efficacy of this system as a way of seeing in the afterlife. But it makes it, again, an interesting and funny method for Yun Bu to return home and to kind of reintegrate him into Fat San, rather than just have him walk in the door and say, "Mom, I'm home." Here we have the manservant praying for the master's return, and an actual, there he is, physically reflected in the darkened water. And they're a little bit of trickiness there that, you don't see a reflection of Peter Chan's character as well. But it works dramatically. And again, Sammo always looking for the human side to the story. And so we have this relationship between the two. Obviously, they've grown up together. I mean, it was quite common in wealthy families that when a boy was young, another boy from a poor family would be adopted into the family to be like his manservant for his whole lifetime. And in fact, Bruce Lee even had Wong An, who was like one of his childhood friend who then in later life became his butler. So it was a similar tradition right up until the 70s. So this is the character here. And we see him in blackface. Now, there's actually a deleted scene, when Leung Jan, now a master of Kung Fu, opens a Kung Fu school, and the two fake former masters, these guys, Lei Hoi San, and his partner, have come to challenge Leung Jan, who they remember as being a Bai Gajai, and get beaten up. And unfortunately, the film was running too long. I'd love to see that footage, but of course, in the tradition of Hong Kong film, it was not kept. So it's lost for all time. But there was a scene when they come in and they get beaten up by Leung Jan. And that would immediately proceed here. And if you look at the beginning of this sequence, you see them staggering into shot, and they're looking kind of beat up. And then they say, this must be our unlucky day. And then, as a way of getting revenge, they decide to sick Master Ngai onto Leung Jan. So Sammo shot that scene, and that was kind of a major fight sequence that was cut from the finished print. There are actually stills of it still in existence. And here's where the Kung Fu school is going to be. I mean, Leung Jan is obviously going to resettle in Fat San with his family and open a school to teach Wing Chun. And earlier has promised to his master, Leung Yitai, that he will actually continue the Wing Chun tradition. Worth pointing out at this point that from Master Ngai's point of view, he believes that Leung Jan is dead. And we never actually get to see the scene with the parents, but it must be quite an emotional thing when Leung Jan, who they've mourned and missed for all this time, suddenly walks in the door and says, "I'm back. Not only that, but I'm a Kung Fu master, and now I'm going to set up shop here in Fat San, not just for his parents, but for everybody else who would have imagined that he'd been killed." So now it's like the Master Ngai is definitely wants to have a duel, not with Leung Jan, who he doesn't realize Leung Jan is actually now a Kung Fu master, but wants to have a duel with Leung Yitai. So now Leung Yitai writing the Chinese characters for the Jupai. Every Chinese martial arts school has a Jupai. In fact, every business has a Jupai. And normally it's outside the door, the main door to the business. And it's a wooden board, and on it is written the motto, the name of the school, and a motto basically, or a name of the business, and the motto as well. And it's very important. And if you were going to close somebody's business down for bad business practices or for teaching bad Kung Fu, you would steal or break the Jupai. And that's actually an element you see in a lot of Kung Fu movies. And maybe if you're not familiar with the reasons why of that element of Chinese culture, you wouldn't know why it was so important. People protect their Jupai. But that's actually where that comes from. And it's played off of here, where we have a moment coming up in the tragedy that kind of sets in motion the final duel of the film, which relates to the importance of a school's Jupai. So here, this wonderful scene when Leung Yitai gets to tell off Master Ngai. At this point, he doesn't realize that Ngai is actually a Manchu. So when he does realize that, he realizes there's a danger beyond whatever physical danger. Because if you're a Manchu, you basically, now, the moment of realization, and that gives them the opening they need to kill him. And they're completely allowed to do whatever they want to do. A very black humor there, as he's like, we see what he's thinking as he's stabbed. And look at this, these two, the medicinal balls. Most of the film, I forgot to mention earlier, most of the film, Frankie Chan's standing there playing with his balls. They're actually those two balls that you move around in your hand. How can one talk about this in any kind of appropriate way? But you get these two metal, they're kind of made of porcelain with a metal ball inside them, and they make a musical noise as you ring them, as you roll them around your hand. It's meant to activate the acupressure points in your palm to further increase your health and the flow of qi around the body. And I always think it's a shame we never really get to see Leung Jan beat up on those guys. But the reason he can't is because they are Manchu officials. If he does hurt or kill them, not only will he be killed, but his whole family, up until like 3 removed, would be wiped out. This was a very cruel punishment that was put onto the Han people by the Manchus. If you killed one of the Manchus, and there's the blood on the Jupai, which is obviously setting in motion the final showdown. But no, they actually would kill not only you but your family, your relatives by marriage, out to like 3 or 4 generations. So it was a major, obviously a major motivation not to kill any of the bullying Manchus, no matter how they behaved. And most Hong Kong films are actually martial arts pictures actually set during this era, because you had basically a nation divided that was in a constant state of conflict, and people using martial arts as a primary method to wage war or to wage a guerrilla war. So that obviously allows a lot of conflict. You haven't got to create artificial scenes. Pretty gory moment there for a martial arts picture. The guys are beheaded and do the headless chicken dance. And again, I mean, I mentioned earlier, it's kind of tough on them because they were just following orders. And I guess Master Ngai had the rights to kill his bodyguards or anybody else he wanted to, so he could actually have them executed, even though they were only obeying the orders given to them by his own father. So, despite the fact that you can't kill an official, now we get the case of Long Jan using the principles of Kung Fu because he can actually challenge Master Ngai to a duel, and because of Master Ngai's weakness of character, he knows he'll accept, which will give him a chance to get at least some form of revenge. Should mention the outfit that he's wearing. I mean, he's got the kind of the sushi chef headband on. That was wearing the white sackcloth and white robes of mourning, traditional Chinese mourning robes, which in the West we wear black for mourning, but in the East it's white. White's like the color of death. And they wear cheap-looking clothes to indicate the sackcloth is to basically show that the family and the people are actually in a state of mourning for the deceased. This set actually built... There are lots of ruins out in the New Territories. This is not one of them. This was actually constructed specifically for the film. If this was a John Woo movie, that would be a John Woo moment, but it's a Sammo Hung movie, so I guess it's not. And then to the attack. And terrific showdown. Hard act to follow, that earlier fight between Frankie Chan and Lam Ching Ying. But they do their damnedest here in this throwdown. And as I mentioned earlier, Yun Bu doing the more tricky acrobatic kicks on behalf of Frankie Chan Fan Kei. Frankie actually can do standing kicks fairly well. I mean, as I mentioned before, he did Taekwondo. And his style is meant to be dragon style. It's not really defined, but the fighting style Master Ngai uses is his dragon style. So it's a combination of his dragon style for the hand techniques, basic kicks that Frankie Chan was doing, and the more acrobatic movements executed by Yun Bu. So for many parts of this fight, Yun Bu is fighting himself, which probably you could say literally doesn't happen that often in Hollywood, though I suppose figuratively it does. People that end up being at war with themselves. But here we actually get to see the physical version of that with him fighting himself. But for a lot of the close range stuff is actually Frankie Chan, and he does a really admirable job. Again, hard to see why he was not used for more period martial art movies after such an impressive showing in this film. I think he himself was successful at that time doing contemporary contemporary dramatic movies or comedies with a very small action content, and those were doing well at the box office. So there was a sense of, even though he had done a good job with this film, that he would continue in the vein in which had given him most success. So those are the kind of films. I remember watching a few of his films at that time, thinking, after watching Prodigal Son, thinking there would be action pictures when I saw his face on the poster, and being disappointed that he was normally a lover more than a fighter. And that's actually Yun Bu kicking Yun Bu. If you use the freeze frame and the zoom, you'll see that jumping up kick was actually Yun Bu, and the guy flying off doing the 360 down to the ground was Yun Bu as well. And it's terrific. Yes, if you go through this shot by shot, the perfection of the use of the couple of stuff, just that jumping kick there, the choice of angle and of technique. Actually, for some of it, the choreography here, Frankie Chan's also been doubled by Lam Ching Ying. So even though he's killed Lam Ching Ying earlier, or had Lam Ching Ying killed inadvertently, Lam Ching Ying comes back to double him for the finale. So in a Hong Kong movie, anything can happen, and everybody gets in the mix. This again is the traditional finale would actually have the two of them standing on that famous bluff overlooking the sea, the same place that the endings of both Dragon Lord and Young Master happened. Sorry, the ending of Young Master and Dragon Lord both happened on basically the same piece of land overlooking the sea. And here, Sammo's obviously tried to make it different, so he's come to these ruins and constructed them so the fight can actually take place on different levels. This plays back to something that he was told earlier by Wong Wabo. Long Jan was instructed, if you injure your opponent, you have to go to the injury. There's no such fair play, and no such thing as fair play in real combat. So this is like an example of the action following the word. This is an amazing stunt. I think that's probably Yun Bu going down the stairs as well. But as I said that, you can't tell. And there are so many, or were so many, slender and agile young stuntmen available at the time that they would actually, any one of them could have done that. If I have one complaint about this fight, is that it's not long enough, because there's just the level, the quality is such. You really wish they could have extended it and had it half as long again, because it's an amazing fight sequence. And a pretty good prosthetic, actually, that, with the blood actually leaking out. Nasty-looking hematoma on his head. And set down for the final showdown, and the close-range punching and trapping techniques of Wing Chun, that incredible rat-a-tat punching technique. I mean, nowadays you've seen a lot of it before. You've seen a lot of it from Bruce Lee and in other places. The kick, boom, beautiful. And it was like, it's not that unusual, but at the time when Wing Chun came out, people were used to using the long-range punches of Choi Li Fut Hung Ga, and they used slow motion there to show the defeat of Master Ngai as he goes down. And it's really, and he can't kill him, because if he kills him, it'll mean death for his family. So this is the extent to which he can get revenge for his teacher's demise. All of which is made up, by the way. I mean, we have no evidence that Leung Yitai died in this way, or that Leung Jan had to fight a duel to avenge his master's death. But it makes for probably a more dramatic tale than the truth. If you've got a choice between, as William Randolph Hearst said, if you've got a choice between the legend and the truth, you print the legend. And that's certainly what they've done here. So we're almost at the end. Boy, I could just rewind it and watch it again. I hope you do just that, because this is a bona fide Hong Kong martial arts masterpiece. And Bai Ga Jai, Prodigal Son, directed by Sammo Hung, and I think his finest film and my favorite of all time. So thank you. It's been a pleasure to watch, and hope some of what I've said has been of interest. And I will see you for the next Kung Fu classic from Hong Kong Legends. Thanks for your continuing support, not just for Hong Kong Legends, but for our industry in general. It's very much appreciated, and I get a lot of keep those emails and letters and cards coming in, because we want your opinions and we need your enthusiasm and support. So thank you. Joy Gin!